Our tyrannical branch manager thought she could throw a farmer's dirty money on the floor and get away with it. She couldn't have been more wrong about what would happen next. Some people live their lives on a hair trigger, just waiting for the world to give them an excuse to explode. My branch manager, Brenda, was one of those people. She was a woman wound so tight you could practically hear her vibrating. She walked through our small-town bank like a shark patrolling a goldfish pond, her eyes scanning for any ripple of imperfection. A pen out of place, a teller smiling too broadly, a customer taking too long, it was all ammunition for her. I was new, just 3 months into my first real job as a teller, and I spent most of my days trying to stay off Brenda's radar. It wasn't easy. She had a sixth sense for insecurity, and mine was a lighthouse beacon. My hands would get clammy every time she glided behind my station. The clack, clack, clack of her heels on the marble floor, a countdown to some fresh criticism. Tuck in your shirt, Alex. Your cash drawer is disorganized. Is that a smudge on the counter? We run a financial institution, not a garage. That Friday started like any other. The morning rush was over, leaving a calm, sun-drenched quiet in the lobby. I was just finishing up with Mrs. Gable and her weekly withdrawal when the bell above the door chimed softly. Mr. Evans walked in. Everyone knew Mr. Evans. He owned a small, family-run farm just outside of town, one of the few that hadn't been swallowed up by the big agricultural corporations. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with hands that looked like they were carved from old oak. A quiet dignity followed him everywhere he went. He always had a kind word, a gentle smile, and he always smelled faintly of fresh soil and sunshine. He came in every Friday afternoon like clockwork to deposit the earnings from the farmer's market. "Afternoon, Alex," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. He set a worn canvas bag on the counter. It wasn't a fancy bank bag. It was the kind of bag you'd use for tools or seeds, and it bulged promisingly. "Afternoon, Mr. Evans. Good week at the market?" I asked, smiling genuinely. He was one of my favorite customers. The good Lord blessed us with sun, and the people blessed us with their business, he nodded. Can't ask for more than that. I unzipped the bag and started pulling out the cash. It was a chaotic mix of 1s, 5s, 10s, and 20s, all worn soft with handling, some of them still carrying a fine layer of dust from the market stalls. It was honest money, earned through sweat and long hours under the sun. It was a lot of money, too. As I started sorting and stacking, I could see it was going to be one of his biggest deposits yet. That's when I heard it. The clack, clack, clack. My stomach tightened. Brenda was on the move. She appeared at my elbow, her arms crossed, a look of profound disgust on her face as she eyed the piles of cash. Her lip curled slightly. "What is this?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She wasn't asking me, she was addressing Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans, who had been patiently waiting, looked at her. "It's my deposit, ma'am." "It's filthy," Brenda snapped. "We cannot accept currency in this condition. It's a health hazard, and it will jam the counting machine." I froze, my hands hovering over a stack of 20s. I'd counted Mr. Evans' money plenty of times. It had never once jammed the machine. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Mr. Evans said, his tone still even, but with a new firmness in it. "It's money from the market. It's been in 100 different hands today. This is how it comes." "Then I suggest you take it elsewhere to have it cleaned before bringing it to this establishment," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. She looked at his work-worn hands, then back at the cash, as if both were equally contaminated. The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My heart was pounding. The other two tellers were pretending to be busy, their eyes fixed on their computers. The two other customers in the bank had fallen silent, watching. This wasn't about bank policy. This was about Brenda needing to put someone in their place. And she had chosen a man who was the salt of the earth. Mr. Evans didn't raise his voice. He just looked her straight in the eye. "This is legal tender. It's my money from my farm. And this is my bank. I'd like to deposit it, please." That was it. That was the spark. Brenda's face went from pale to a blotchy red. For a woman so obsessed with control, she had no control over her own temper. "We are not obligated to accept your refuse," she hissed. And then she did something I will never forget. She reached over, scooped up the largest piles of cash I had sorted, thousands of dollars in worn bills, and she didn't just push them back at him. She threw them, not on the counter, on the floor. The bills fluttered in the air for a silent, horrifying moment before scattering across the pristine marble floor at Mr. Evans's feet. The quiet of the bank was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Mr. Evans just stood there, his jaw tight, looking down at the money he had worked all week to earn, now lying like trash on the ground. He slowly lifted his eyes from the scattered cash to Brenda's smug, triumphant face. The look in his eyes wasn't anger, not yet. It was a deep, profound hurt that was 100 times worse. My own eyes started to well up with tears of pure rage and humiliation for him. Brenda just stood there, a cruel little smile on her lips, waiting for him to stoop down and collect his filthy money. But he didn't move. No one did. The moment stretched into an eternity. Then, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the silence from behind us. A voice no one had been paying attention to. A man in a simple but impeccably tailored suit, who had been sitting in the waiting area, slowly rose to his feet. He looked past Mr. Evans, his gaze locking directly onto my manager. "Brenda," the man said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an anvil. "Pick it up." Brenda's head snapped towards the man as if she'd been struck. Her face, which had been a mask of smug satisfaction, twisted into confusion and then pure, undiluted rage. "Excuse me?" she spat, her voice tight with disbelief. "Who do you think you are, talking to me like that?" The man took a slow, deliberate step forward. He wasn't physically imposing, but he radiated an aura of absolute authority that seemed to suck the air out of the room. He ignored her question, his gaze as cold and hard as the marble floor. "I gave you an instruction, Brenda. Pick it up." He said each word with a chilling precision. For a moment I thought Brenda was actually going to lunge at him. A vein throbbed in her temple. She was a cornered animal, all snarling teeth and fury. "You have no right," she started, but the man cut her off. "My name is David Harrison," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the silent bank. "I'm the regional vice president for this district, and the man whose money you just threw on the floor like garbage. He sits on our regional advisory board for agricultural business, so I will ask you one last time. Pick it up." If a person could physically shatter, Brenda did it in that moment. The color drained from her face, leaving a pasty, gray pallor. Her jaw went slack. The rage in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a dawning, frantic panic. She knew that name. We all did. Mr. Harrison was a phantom, a name on corporate memos, the final authority on everything. We'd never seen him in our branch before. He was the man who could end careers with a single email. Her eyes darted from Mr. Harrison's unyielding face to Mr. Evans, who stood like a statue, his expression unreadable. Then she looked down at the money scattered around his worn work boots. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. With a choked little sob, Brenda moved. Her expensive heels scraped on the floor as she shuffled from behind the counter. And then, in front of the entire lobby, the other tellers, the two customers, me and Mr. Evans. Our pristine, tyrannical branch manager got down on her hands and knees. It was the most excruciating thing I had ever witnessed. Her movements were jerky and humiliating. Her manicured fingers, usually used for pointing out flaws, scrabbled on the floor, gathering the worn, dusty bills. A $5 bill had slid under the customer rope stand, and she had to get low, her cheek nearly pressed to the floor, to retrieve it. Each bill she picked up felt like a nail being hammered into her professional coffin. She didn't dare look at anyone. She just gathered the cash, her shoulders shaking, and finally rose to her feet, her face a mess of shame and terror. She held the crumpled wad of money in her trembling hand, extending it towards the counter, not daring to look at Mr. Evans. Mr. Harrison hadn't moved a muscle. "Place it on the counter," he commanded softly. Brenda complied, her hand shaking so badly a few bills fluttered back to the floor. She flinched, but Mr. Harrison ignored them. "Now apologize to Mr. Evans." Brenda's head finally came up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked at Mr. Evans, and the apology that came out was a pathetic, watery squeak. I'm sorry." Mr. Evans simply nodded, his dignity a stark, towering contrast to her complete and utter collapse. Mr. Harrison let the apology hang in the air for a beat before he delivered the final, clinical blow. "Alex," he said, turning his gaze to me. My heart leaped into my throat. "Please take Mr. Evans's deposit and process it. Use the manual count. We wouldn't want to jam the machine." The polite words were laced with ice. Then he turned back to Brenda. "As for you," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion, "your behavior was not only unprofessional, it was despicable. It is an embarrassment to this institution, and a flagrant violation of our code of conduct. You represent everything we strive not to be. Please go to your office, collect your personal belongings, and leave the key on your desk. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." Brenda just stood there swaying slightly, the crumpled bill still on the floor by her feet, forgotten. It was over. Just like that. The shark had been harpooned. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, no sounds coming out. Finally, with a defeated slump, she turned and walked stiffly towards her office, not looking at anyone. The clack-clack-clack of her heels was no longer a sound of power, but a pathetic retreat. I quickly and respectfully began counting Mr. Evans's money, my hands shaking almost as much as Brenda's had been. The whole bank seemed to let out a collective breath it had been holding. Mr. Evans slid the rest of the money from his bag onto the counter for me. He caught my eye and gave me a small, sad nod of thanks. A few minutes later, Brenda emerged from her office clutching a small cardboard box. She didn't look at us. She marched toward the front door, head down. But as she passed Mr. Evans, she stopped. She looked up, and the look she gave him was no longer one of fear or shame. It was pure, distilled hatred. "You'll regret this," she whispered, a venomous promise. Then she turned and shoved the glass door open so hard it shuddered in its frame, and was gone. The bell above the door chimed, marking her exit. An awkward silence fell once more. I finished my count and slid the receipt to Mr. Evans. Mr. Harrison, who had been watching everything with that same unnerving calm, walked over to my station. He looked from the completed deposit slip to Mr. Evans, and then his eyes settled on me. They were sharp, intelligent, and completely unreadable. I had no idea if I was about to be praised for my composure or reprimanded for not stepping in sooner. "Alex," he said, his voice pulling me to full attention. "And you, Mr. Evans. Could I see you both in the manager's office, please?" My blood ran cold. The manager's office, Brenda's office, was a place I avoided at all costs. It was where people got written up, where dreams of a quarterly bonus went to die. Now, the architect of that misery was gone, but the ghost of her authority still lingered. Following Mr. Harrison into that room felt like walking into the lion's den, even if the lion had just been tranquilized and carted away. Mr. Evans followed behind me, his heavy work boots silent on the carpeted floor of the office. The room felt strange without Brenda's presence. Her ridiculously oversized "World's Best Boss" mug, a gift from her to herself, still sat on the corner of her desk, a monument to her delusion. Mr. Harrison walked around the large mahogany desk and sat in Brenda's chair. The seat let out a faint squeak of protest, as if it too was shocked by the sudden change in leadership. He gestured for Mr. Evans and me to take the 2 chairs opposite him. We sat. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. I stared at a motivational poster on the wall that read, "Success is the only option," and felt a wave of irony so intense it was almost nauseating. Finally, Mr. Harrison folded his hands on the desk and looked at Mr. Evans. The hardness in his expression softened, replaced by something that looked like genuine respect and regret. "Elisha," he began, using Mr. Evans's first name, the sound of it echoing the quiet authority he commanded. "On behalf of this entire bank, I want to offer you my most sincere and profound apology. What happened out there was inexcusable. There is no place for that kind of prejudice and disrespect in our company, or anywhere for that matter." Mr. Evans Elijah simply nodded, his weathered face calm. "I appreciate that, David. It wasn't the bank's fault. It was hers." It is the bank's responsibility when it happens under our roof, Mr. Harrison corrected him firmly. We should have known. There must have been signs. He paused, his gaze flicking to me for a fraction of a second, and my stomach did a little flip. Were we all going to be punished for not reporting her sooner? But how could we? She held our jobs in the palm of her hand. He turned his attention back to Elijah. I understand you sit on the agricultural board. I hope this incident won't sour your relationship with us. Your insight is invaluable. Elijah let out a low chuckle, a sound like stones rolling in a gentle stream. David, I've been banking here since my father opened his first account 50 years ago. I've seen managers come and go. This branch is part of my community. One bad apple isn't going to make me chop down the whole orchard. But, he leaned forward slightly, his expression growing serious. That apple was rotten for a long time. People knew. They were just too scared to say anything. The words hung in the air, a quiet accusation aimed not at Mr. Harrison, but at the culture of fear Brenda had cultivated. Mr. Harrison's jaw tightened. He knew it was the truth. He looked down at his hands for a moment before his gaze lifted and met mine. Now it was my turn. I braced myself. Alex, he said, his tone shifting from collegial to professional. You handled a very difficult situation with composure. I was watching from the moment Mr. Evans walked in. You treated him with respect. You were professional. And when your manager acted inappropriately, you didn't participate. You froze, which is understandable. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. However, he continued, and my relief evaporated, Elijah is right. A culture of fear allowed this to happen. A manager like Brenda thrives when good people stay silent. Tell me, has she behaved this way before? The question was a trap, and we all knew it. If I said yes, I was admitting to letting it slide. If I said no, I was a liar. I took a deep breath. Not like that, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She was never physical, but she was cruel. To everyone. She would make comments, humiliate people in front of customers. She treated certain people, I glanced at Elijah, with less respect than others. She made it clear she didn't like the farming community's business, said it was untidy. Mr. Harrison absorbed this, his expression grim. I see. We have an anonymous HR reporting system for this very reason. And get fired for poor performance a week later, I countered, a spark of defiance I didn't know I possessed flaring up. We all knew how it worked. She had been here for 10 years. We're all replaceable. To my shock, Mr. Harrison didn't get angry. He nodded slowly, a look of grim understanding on his face. You're right. The system failed. And for that, I'm also sorry. He fell silent for a long moment, looking between me and Elijah. The gears were turning in his head. You could almost see him processing, planning. Well, he said finally, a new decisiveness in his tone. This branch needs a new manager. Someone who understands this community. Someone who understands that the value of a customer is not determined by the cleanliness of their cash. He paused and his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Alex, he said, effective Monday, you are the acting branch manager. The room went completely still. I'm sure my mouth was hanging open. Me? Manager? I'd been a teller for 3 months. I was still learning how to properly unjam the coin machine. The idea was so absurd, so completely out of left field, that I almost laughed. Sir, I don't think I'm qualified, I stammered, my mind reeling. You're qualified in the one area that matters most right now. You're not Brenda, he said bluntly. You have decency. You have composure under pressure. The rest can be taught. I'll have my best regional trainer here on Monday to work with you. This is a provisional appointment, of course. We'll see how you do over the next 90 days. He looked at Elijah. I trust you'll agree this is a step in the right direction, Elijah. Elijah looked at me, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. It was the first time I'd seen him truly smile since he'd walked in. I think it's an excellent choice, David. A very excellent choice. I was speechless, floating in a state of surreal shock. Fired and promoted in the same afternoon. It was impossible. My head was spinning. Mr. Harrison started outlining the next steps, the call I would need to have with HR. the security protocols for closing the branch tonight, the meeting on Monday morning. I nodded along, understanding maybe every third word. Then, just as I was starting to process my new reality, my desk phone on the teller line began to ring. Then the second teller's phone rang, and the third, all at once. It was a shrill, jarring cacophony that cut through the calm of the office. We all looked at each other, confused. Who would be calling every single line simultaneously? My colleague Sarah appeared at the open office door, her face pale and wide-eyed. "Alex, Mr. Harrison, you need to see this," she said, her voice trembling. She pointed towards the front of the bank. Through the large glass windows, we could see them. A line of dusty pickup trucks and farm vehicles were pulling into our parking lot. Not one or two, but a dozen of them. More were coming down the main road. Farmers, recognizable from the market, were getting out of their trucks. They weren't angry. They looked determined. They were all holding canvas bags, just like Elijah's. And at the front of the line, standing by the door and directing the traffic, was Brenda. For a heart-stopping second, I thought Brenda had rallied an army. I thought her parting shot, "You'll regret this," was about to detonate in a way I couldn't possibly imagine. Mr. Harrison shot to his feet, his face a thundercloud of disbelief and fury. He clearly thought the same thing. "What in the hell is she doing?" he bit out, striding towards the office door. We followed him out into the main lobby. The scene unfolding outside was surreal. The parking lot, usually half empty on a Friday afternoon, was now a sea of Ford F-150s and dusty Chevy Silverados. Men and women in jeans and work boots were gathering, their canvas bags in hand, forming a quiet, orderly line that snaked from the front door all the way to the edge of the street. It looked like half the farming community of the county had descended upon our small branch, and there was Brenda, right at the front, but she wasn't leading a protest. She wasn't inciting a riot. She was holding the door open. As the first farmer, a stern-looking woman with braids as white as snow, reached the entrance, Brenda gave a stiff, awkward nod. "Welcome to Mountain Ridge Bank," she said, her voice loud enough for us to hear through the glass. "We value your business." My jaw hit the floor. This wasn't an attack. This was penance. Public, self-inflicted, soul-crushingly humiliating penance. Mr. Harrison stopped dead in his tracks, his anger deflating into sheer, dumbfounded astonishment. He looked over at Elijah, who had a strange, unreadable expression on his face. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was more like a weary sort of satisfaction, the look of a man who knew the nature of the soil he was standing on. "Elijah, Mr. Harrison said, his voice low. "Did you do this?" Elijah shook his head slowly. "Not me. News travels fast in a small town, David, especially when it's about one of our own being disrespected." He gestured with his chin towards the parking lot. "Brenda made a lot of enemies over the years. She just made her last one today. They heard what she did, and they heard she got fired, but they also heard about you." He looked from Mr. Harrison to me. "They heard the bank did the right thing. This isn't a protest. This is a vote of confidence. A vote of confidence that looked like a run on the bank, only in reverse. They were here to deposit, to show their solidarity, to prove that their filthy money was the lifeblood of this community, and by extension, this branch. And Brenda? She was stuck in the middle. I realized then what must have happened. Word of her firing must have hit the farmer's grapevine in minutes. Someone, maybe a dozen someones, must have called her. They wouldn't have threatened her. They didn't need to. They would have just explained, in calm, simple terms, what was about to happen. They were going to come and support the bank that had finally stood up for them. And she, the woman who had scorned them, was going to stand at that door and welcome every single one of them. It was the only way she could ever hope to show her face in this town again. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a sentence. For the next 2 hours we worked. Mr. Harrison, to his eternal credit, rolled up the sleeves of his expensive suit, took over the third teller station, and started counting cash. He was surprisingly fast. I stood at my station, the acting manager, my earlier panic replaced by a steady, focused calm. Elijah stood near the front, greeting each of his friends and neighbors by name, a quiet pillar of the community he so clearly loved. Each deposit was a story. The worn-out singles from a young woman who sold jam and honey, the roll of 20s from a man who sold organic beef, the bag heavy with coins from a family whose children ran a sweet corn stand. It was all honest money, and we treated it like gold. No one used the cash counting machine. We counted every single bill by hand, looking each customer in the eye and thanking them for their business. Brenda stood at that door the entire time. She never wavered. Her face was a blank mask, but I could see the tremor in her hands. She held that heavy glass door open for every last person. Her own personal purgatory played out in the lobby of the bank she once ruled. When the last farmer, a young man barely out of his teens, had made his deposit, he stopped in front of her on his way out. "Thank you for holding the door, Miss Brenda," he said, his voice polite but firm. "My grandma always said good manners don't cost a thing." She just nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. Then, as the last truck pulled out of the parking lot, she let the door swing shut, turned without a word to anyone, and walked away down the street, disappearing from our lives for good. As we locked up that evening, the branch was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the tense, anxious silence of before. It was a calm, peaceful quiet, the feeling of a fever having finally broken. The vault was fuller than it had been in months. Mr. Harrison walked over to me as I finished counting my drawer. He put a hand on my shoulder. 90 days, Alex, he said, a genuine smile in his eyes. I have a feeling you're going to do just fine. You already know what the most important part of this job is. I looked around the empty lobby, at the faint smudges of honest dirt on the floor that no one would be yelling about tomorrow. I thought of Elijah, his quiet dignity, and the community that had rallied not with anger, but with overwhelming, undeniable presence. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time all day. "I think I do."